So today we'll be dealing with the pons. Literally pons means bridge. One specialty of pons is this is one structure in the body which has more width than height or length. There are certain other structures like this, namely pituitary and cecum. So pons acts like a bridge between the two cerebellar hemispheres, and even vertical also it acts like a bridge between midbrain and medulla. So it is the middle part of the brainstem, connected to cerebellum through middle cerebellar peduncle. Length is 2.5 centimeters. Forms upper half of the floor of fourth ventricle. So on the ventral surface, two important features which are striking are, one is the basilar sulcus, the other one is the transverse pontine fibers which cause striations. So these are usually found by the pontocerebellar fibers. So these pontocerebellar fibers start from pontine nuclei, then they'll cross midline and enter the opposite side cerebellum through the middle cerebellar peduncle. You can see here, this is the basilar sulcus. These are the transverse striations caused by the pontocerebellar fibers. Actually, they are the part of cortico-pontocerebellar pathway. So from cerebral cortex to the pontine nuclei, from pontine nuclei to the opposite side cerebellum, cortico-pontocerebellar pathway. So what are the nerves emerging from the pons? Four nerves you can identify here: 1, 2, 3, 4. So one is the trigeminal nerve, emerges from the middle of the ventrolateral aspect of the pons. So there are two roots, a small medial motor root and a large lateral sensory root. You can see here, this is the motor root and a sensory root. Actually, this is the landmark which separates axial pons from the middle cerebellar peduncle. The one lateral to this is the middle cerebellar peduncle. The one medial to this is the axial pons. The next nerve is the abducent nerve. From sulcus between pons and pyramid, you can see here. So this is the sulcus between pons and the pyramid. This is the pyramid. Already medulla class has been completed. You can see here, this is the pyramid of the medulla oblongata. This is the olive. So this is cerebellopontine angle. You can see the abducent nerve emerging between the pons and the pyramid. So then you can see the facial nerve and vestibulocochlear nerve. So each having two roots. So medial to lateral. So there will be motor root of facial and the sensory root of facial. You can see the motor and sensory roots of facial nerves. Then you can also see the vestibular part and cochlear part of the eighth cranial nerve. You can see here, this is the vestibular and cochlear part of the eighth cranial nerve. As you see, there are four cranial nerves emerging here: the fifth cranial nerve, sixth cranial nerve, seventh cranial nerve, and the eighth cranial nerve. So on the dorsal surface, so separated from the medulla by an imaginary line passing between the caudal margins of the middle cerebellar peduncle. If you see, this is the middle cerebellar peduncle. So if we draw an imaginary line like this, so that separates the medulla and pons. And you can also see a striking feature here in the floor of the fourth ventricle, striae medullaris, which separates the pons from the medulla. You can see here, on either side, a sulcus divides the area into two parts, from medial to lateral. So the medial side, it is the medial eminence and facial colliculus. On the lateral side, it is the vestibular area. So this one is the median sulcus, and you can see this is the sulcus limitans, which separates this median eminence and facial colliculus from the vestibular area. You can see here, this is the sagittal section of the fourth ventricle. You can see this is the roof and this is the floor. And if you see, almost upper 2/3 of the floor is formed by the dorsal surface of the pons, whereas lower 1/3 is formed by the open part of the medulla. So here also again you can see this is the entire line which is representing the sulcus limitans. So fourth ventricle is a separate class where we will see all the features of the fourth ventricle. You can see certain elevations called facial colliculus here. So where the facial nerve take a internal genu around the abducent nucleus, forming the facial colliculus in the floor of the fourth ventricle. So let us see the internal features of Pons, studied at two different levels. So one is the section at lower part of the Pons, the other is the section at upper part of Pons. Any transverse section of Pons shows two parts, namely the ventral part, which is the basilar part, and the dorsal part, the tegmental part. Basilar part is almost same at both levels, whereas tegmental part varies at both levels. So if you see the basilar part, as I said, it is same at both levels. We are dealing it with in a single slide. As you can see here, it is nothing but upward continuation of the pyramids. So you know the pyramids where we can see the corticospinal tracts. So it is nothing but the upward continuation of the pyramids. So what are the fibers through the basilar part? So longitudinal running fibers include the corticospinal, name itself speaks, from cerebral cortex to spinal cord. Then corticopontine, that is cerebral cortex to the pontine nuclei, which are located in the basilar part. And here you can see the corticonuclear fibers from cerebral cortex to the nuclei of the cranial nerves. Corticospinal, corticopontine, and corticonuclear, all these are longitudinal fibers. Whereas transverse fibers include, so the next continuation of this corticopontine fibers, so from the cerebral cortex to pontine nuclei. So from the pontine nuclei, they will go to the opposite side cerebellum in the form of pontocerebellar fibers. These fibers are actually creating the transverse striations on the ventral surface of the pons. So pontine nuclei, these are scattered among the above said fibers. You can see here, this is the basilar part. You can see these are the corticopontine and corticonuclear fibers, and this black dot, you can see these are the pontine nuclei, and these are the pontocerebellar fibers which are emerging or passing through the middle cerebellar peduncle into the cerebellum. So now if we come to the tegmental part, so tegmental part is nothing but the upward continuation of medulla except pyramids. So in the lower part of pons, what are all the features we identify? Again, always I say it is just what is the white matter and what is the gray matter which is present and what are its functions if there is any infarct or bleed. So those white matter and gray matter which are affected, their function is lost. So in a simple way, we'll just see through the diagrams what are all the gray matter and white matter we are able to see here. So if you see the white matter here in the L shape, you can see from here to here, from dorsal to ventral aspect. So this is the medial longitudinal bundle or medial longitudinal fasciculus, and you can see the tectospinal tract, and you can see the rubrospinal tract, and this is the medial lemniscus. You already know this is a part of the dorsal column pathway, and here you can see the spinal lemniscus. So at this level you are seeing only two lemnisci in the lower part of pons, and here you can see this is the trapezoid body, which is nothing but the cochlear nuclei. This cochlear nuclei, the fibers which are coming from the cochlear nuclei will cross here and ascend upwards as the lateral lemniscus. So the crossing of this cochlear efferent from this cochlear fibers, these form the trapezoid body. So nothing but trapezoid body is one of the area where the auditory pathway is crossing in the brainstem. So this is seen in the lower part of the pons. And in addition to that, you can see here the spinal tract of the trigeminal nerve along with the spinal nucleus. So here you can see the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and this will be the medial cerebellar peduncle. So these are the few white matter what we are observing, and we can also see this is the abducent nerve and this is the facial nerve. See, this is what I was speaking about, the facial nerve taking a internal genu, a bend around the abducent nucleus, forming the facial colliculus in the floor of the fourth ventricle. So this is an example for the neurobiotaxis. Then if you see the gray matter, you can see here this is the abducent nucleus. This is the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. Here you can see the superior salivatory nucleus. This is the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Here you can see the dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei. Here you can see the vestibular nuclei. So what is the gray matter? So this section passes through facial colliculus, yes. You have seen this is the facial colliculus. So facial colliculus is at the lower level of pons. So please take care of this point. Abducent nucleus and motor nucleus of facial nerve. So these are the three. These are the two important nuclei which has to be mentioned if you are if you are drawing a section at lower level of pons. Then you can see the neurobiotaxis. So what is this? Migration of motor nucleus towards the sensory nucleus. What is happening here actually? So if you see the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve carries the sensations from head and neck region. In the same way, this is the motor nucleus. This is the motor nucleus which actually supplies the muscles of facial expression. So, in order to create a quick response, the motor nucleus sends its fibers close towards the sensory nucleus of that particular area. So, this migration of motor nucleus towards the sensory nucleus is called as neurobiotaxis. So, this is actually causing this internal genome and the creation of facial colliculus. So this facial nerve, the motor fibers, you can see clearly they are looping around the abducent nucleus and they are going as much as close possible to the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, from which this area is actually receiving the sensations, general sensations. Okay, so actually developmentally, if we see this and this relation of this motor nucleus of the facial nerve to the abducent nucleus is different. Usually this will be lying on the dorsolateral aspect. Then it comes to this position as much close as possible to the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, because this motor nucleus supplies the area from which the sensations are coming to the spinal nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. So that stimulation leads the movement of this motor neurons or this nerve fibers coming from the motor nucleus of facial nerve towards the sensory nucleus, that is called as neurobiotaxis. So example, migration of motor nucleus of facial nerve towards the sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve and absent nucleus is an example for neurobiotaxis. So gray matter, what are all the gray matter which is present here? You can see here. So around this superior salivatory nucleus only there might be inferior salivatory nucleus in and around, and also there will be lacrimatory nucleus. So other than that, the other gray matter what you are seeing here is the abducent nucleus, the motor nucleus, and you are also seeing the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. You are seeing the vestibular nuclei, you are seeing the dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei. So you have to just list them out: superior salivatory nucleus, inferior salivatory nucleus, lacrimatory nucleus, nucleus of tractus solitarius. Oh, this is not actually shown in this. There are certain important aspects about this nucleus of tractus solitarius. As you see here, this is the nucleus which actually receives the taste sensation from the tongue, and you can also see the vestibular, dorsal, and ventral cochlear in the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. So white matter. So what is white matter? We have already seen it in the diagram. So just to list it out: spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, medial lemniscus, spinal lemniscus, medial longitudinal bundle, trapezoid body, tectospinal and rubrospinal. Yes, we have already seen this. If you properly observe, cell-shaped manner, you can see the medial longitudinal bundle, tectospinal, rubrospinal, medial lemniscus, spinal lemniscus, the spinal tract of trigeminal nerve, and you can also see the trapezoid body. So then, coming to the upper part of pons. So more or less, if you see here, you observe that clearly you can see the basilar part remains the same. You can see the corticopontine nuclear and the corticospinal fibers, and you can also see the pontine nuclei. You can also see the transverse running fibers, the pontocerebellar fibers, and you can see the prominent middle cerebellar peduncle. So here the inferior cerebellar peduncle is not present, and you can see a part of superior cerebellar peduncle, and you can also see the cavity of fourth ventricle roofed by superior medullary velum, bridging the both sides. And now, if you observe properly, so gradually the trapezoid body is becoming smaller and smaller, and almost if you come to the highest level of pons, this will disappear, because this, after the cochlear fibers cross in the trapezoid body, they ascend as lateral lemniscus. They ascend as lateral lemniscus. So earlier, if you see, there were only two lemnisci, the medial lemniscus and the spinal lemniscus. Now between these two also there will be one lemnisci, and lateral to the spinal lemniscus also there will be lateral lemniscus. There will be total four lemnisci. I'll show you in this section. Yeah, so here you can see the white matter. Just to list out, you can see here this is the medial longitudinal bundle as usual. Then this is the tectospinal, this is the rubrospinal. And if you see this lemniscus system from medial to lateral side, you can see here there's a medial lemniscus, which is nothing but the part of dorsal column pathway. And you can see this is the trigeminal lemniscus, which has arisen from the spinal nucleus and the principal sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. And you can see the spinal lemniscus, and you can also see the lateral lemniscus. So in the lower part, we have seen only the medial lemniscus and the spinal lemniscus, and in the upper part of Pons, there are two more lemnisci which has added. One is the trigeminal lemniscus coming from the trigeminal nuclei, and the lateral lemniscus coming from the cochlear fibers emerging from the trapezoid body after crossing in the trapezoid body. So gray matter, what is the gray matter present here? You can see here. So earlier we have seen the spinal nucleus, but here we are seeing the main sensory nucleus or principal sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve, and we are also seeing the motor nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. Earlier we have seen the motor nucleus of facial nerve, abducent nucleus, and spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve in the lower part of the pons, whereas in the upper part of the pons, the tegmentum is having the motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve and the main sensory nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. And there is some caudal part of the nucleus ceruleus also, which is a part of reticular system. Then if you go to the white matter, I've already shown you in the diagram: medial lemniscus, spinal lemniscus, medial longitudinal bundle, tectospinal tract, lateral lemniscus, trigeminal lemniscus, and rubrospinal tract, almost 7. So then coming to the blood supply of Pons, we can see that is the basilar artery which is present in the basilar sulcus. Actually, this gives 3 sets of branches, namely the paramedian branches which will supply the paramedian area, then short circumferential branches which supplies the anterolateral surface, and long circumferential branches which supplies the posterolateral surface of the Pons. In addition to that, there will be additional supply from anterior inferior cerebral artery and superior cerebellar artery. So coming to the clinical symptoms, Millard-Gubler syndrome, as you can see, this is the area involved in Millard-Gubler syndrome. So as I said earlier, simple logic, it is gray matter, white matter, and what is its function and what happens if it gets affected. Let us see what is the gray matter and white matter which is affecting here. We can see the pontine nuclear affected, and you can see the abducent nerve is being affected. Okay, and you can also see the pontine corticonuclear and corticospinal fibers are being affected. Let us see the results of this. So medial inferior pontine syndrome is the other name for Millard-Gubler syndrome. What are the features? Ipsilateral medial squint. Why? Medial rectus is intact because it is supplied by oculomotor nerve, whereas lateral rectus, which is supplied by the abducent nerve, is damaged or paralyzed. As you see here, abducent nerve is gone, so lateral, see, this is the involvement of abducent nerve, 6th nerve, LR6. Lateral rectus is supplied by the abducent nerve, so this is paralyzed, so lateral rectus is paralyzed, so the eyeball is pulled towards medial side, resulting in ipsilateral medial squint. Then ipsilateral facial palsy, definitely you can see this is the facial nerve which is getting involved, so same side facial palsy. So then, in addition to that, contralateral hemiplegia, obviously. So after the level of Pons only, there will be crossing of the pyramidal fibers. So contralateral. So ipsilateral medial squint due to involvement of abducent nerve, ipsilateral facial palsy due to involvement of facial nerve, and contralateral hemiplegia due to involvement of the corticospinal tract. So this is the Millard-Gubler syndrome. And if you see, this is the area involved in pontocerebellar angle syndrome. So classically, you can see here facial nerve is involved, definitely facial nerve paralysis, and you can see this vestibulocochlear nerve being involved. So definitely there will be some malfunction related to the hearing and balance. So let us go and see what will be the symptoms of pontocerebellar angle syndrome. So this will be the pontocerebellar angle syndrome. You can see the involvement of 7th, 8th cranial nerves. Here you can see clearly the 7th and 8th cranial nerves. Don't confuse with 8 and 9. 8 and 9 is just labeling here. So 8th is the 7th cranial nerve, 9th is the 8th cranial nerve. So pontocerebellar angle contains 7th, 8th cranial nerves, flocculus of cerebellum and choroid plexus of 4th vertical. So why there might be pontocerebellar angle syndrome is due to the acoustic neuroma arising from Schwann cells surrounding cochlear nerve. So always remember acoustic neuroma arising from Schwann cells. So where these Schwann cells are there? So these are the Schwann cells which are actually surrounding the cochlear nerve. Okay, so this tumor compresses pontocerebellar angle structures. So what are these pontocerebellar angle structures? The seventh cranial nerve, eighth cranial nerve, flocculus of cerebellum, and choroid plexus of fourth ventricle. So let us see what will be the results of these structures being compressed. So tinnitus, progressive deafness, and vertigo. Definitely cochleovestibular. So tinnitus, progressive deafness, and vertigo resulting from compression of the eighth cranial nerve. So ipsilateral ataxia and staggering rate, flocculus being compressed, so definitely that affects the balance. Then ipsilateral facial palsy, definitely seventh cranial nerve is involved. Then ipsilateral loss of pain and temperature and loss of corneal reflex. So one thing we didn't discuss here, if you observe this structure, what is this? This is the spinal nucleus and tract of trigeminal nerve. So involvement of this is leading to this symptom, ipsilateral loss of pain and temperature and loss of corneal reflex. So this is how, if we know the gray matter and white matter and functions, whatever the area of brain which is being affected, all the symptoms can be easily derived. So then pontine hemorrhage. So what you have to remember is in pontine hemorrhage, PPP, triple P. What is the triple P? Pinpoint pupil, pyrexia, and paralysis. So these are the three P's in pontine hemorrhage. So symptoms: pinpoint pupil, hyperpyrexia, deep coma, bilateral paralysis of face and limbs. So why this is happening? Pinpoint pupil, involvement of the trigeminal nerve. So there are three divisions of trigeminal nerve, namely mandibular, maxillary, and ophthalmic. So ophthalmic will give a nasociliary. So nasociliary is connected to the ciliary ganglion. The ciliary ganglion will give short ciliary and long ciliary nerves, which will go to the constrictors of the pupil. So that is why, if that is affected, it results in pinpoint pupil. So then hyperpyrexia, because the hypothalamospinal fibers. The hypothalamus is the thermoregulatory center. So hypothalamospinal fibers are being affected, resulting in hyperpyrexia. Then deep coma, because in pons, medulla, and midbrain. So there is a vast reticular formation which is responsible for activating the, or keeping the human, or keeping the individual awake. So that is being affected, resulting in deep coma. That means that is due to failure of ARAS, ascending reticular activating system. So then bilateral paralysis of face and limbs, definitely bilateral paralysis of face due to facial nerve, and limbs due to corticospinal tract.